There's more video recording being done today than ever before in history. And yet, there's something that seems to be getting neglected. And I know I'm guilty of it too. But in this generation, everyone has a smartphone pretty much, and everyone is recording everything. Their day at the park, their trip here, their trip there. But everyone seems to be forgetting their history. Yes, there is a way of recording your history. Now, I'm a kid of the 60s and the 70s. That's when I grew up, and in the 80s. And of course, in the 80s, we had VHS cameras that could record things for us. And my kids had access because their grandmother gave them an older VHS recorder, and they did things like their own TV shows or whatever. They would make up their own skits and stories and do that kind of thing. But in my age, we had something called Super 8. It was 8mm film. And with the 8mm film, it was about 3 minutes long for the smallest rolls. And it cost quite a bit considerably to get it developed. And then you had to have the projector and the camera, of course, as well. And you would have a family night where everybody would get together. And that was kind of cool. I did that as I was in high school. My parents did. I did a lot of work for them, and they rewarded me with a Super 8 camera. I guess that's the way they looked at it. And so I did a lot of recording that way. And I still hope to get a lot of those, even though the film has deteriorated over time. I'm hoping to get a lot of those digitized. But this is what the generation today is forgetting. Now, I've got 3 kids, and they're older, and it hasn't struck them yet. And this may seem like a kind of a narcissistic moment, but it's like, I'm in my 60s. I'm not going to be here forever. I've had lots of stories and things to tell about my own life, and even about things that I know about my parents and my grandparents. And yet, no one has clued in yet that I'm not going to be here forever. Now, what's interesting is that, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of guilty of the same. As my parents got older, my mom, she has dementia at the moment of recording this, and she's had it for about several years, I'll say. And she was struggling with it even before Dad died. My father died in 21, 4.5 years ago, I guess that is, maybe more now. And I remember now, there's many times when I'm just, in the washroom cleaning up, maybe shaving, and I start to think, what was that story Dad used to say about what was that about we had the chain on the tractor tires, and we put them somewhere and we couldn't find them, and what? There was a story about it, something about we found them somewhere else, or somehow we recalled something else, or you even think of your childhood and you think, well, I remember I had that Batmobile toy that what happened to it, or what was my grandparents really like? What was my grandfather, both of them, what were they really, really like? And all I have are these little bits of memory of who they were and what they were like. That both my grandfathers they fought in the First World War, and they both survived that. And I know my grandfather on my dad's side was a gunner. And I do recall some story about either him, you see, these are the details I don't remember, either a shell, I think it might have been my grandfather, but I might be confusing with someone who was working with a gunner. Now, the gunner was the one who did the artillery stuff, and in those days the shells would come out of after the artillery discharged, and after the gun discharged, and they would still be hot, and I guess one rolled against his leg and burnt his leg. Now, these kind of stories, is like, my dad would have remembered. My dad was sharp right to the end. He died of a stroke, unfortunately, which took him out, and but he was 87, and his mind was really quite sharp for somebody who was 87. He could have remembered. Now, COVID had a lot to do with it. COVID had a lot to do with it because there was a lot of lockdowns. There was a time when we couldn't even get down to see my parents. My wife, she feels the same about her dad, who was basically in a home. Her dad was a free spirit, kind of, well, not a free spirit, but he loved to travel his whole life. And everything he did was for traveling, and that was his thing that he did, even when he was, his job, that he had growing up, raising the family, was traveling. Anyway, she'll sometimes grieve the fact that when he was in a home, and we both think that he passed away basically just from being in lockdown. You know, seeing people through the window and all this stuff. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it was necessary to a point. It was necessary to a point to stop the spread. But we lost a lot. We really did. I didn't get to see my parents in those last couple of years. And then by that time, Mom's dementia. Mom is like, she doesn't remember anything now. If I ask her, she doesn't even remember the house that we built her, that my dad and I built her. And she lived there for 40 years. And no recollection of it. She just remembers where we lived before that, when we were growing up as a family. But this generation seems oblivious to the fact. I don't know what we're all, you know, I don't know what this generation, and what I mean by this generation is like my kids' age, you know, 20s, 30s. I find it very rare that any one of those people are saying, hey, Dad, sit down and tell me this story. Or what about this or what about that? They're not just letting the film roll, and it doesn't cost a thing. I mean, here I'm going to talk for 10 or 20 minutes, and man, 3 minutes of this would have cost a lot of money on 8mm movie projector. And then you'd have to set up the screen and the projector, and it was kind of fun. I mean, I loved it. I'm still into projectors. I like digital projectors and watching movies like that. But yeah, there seems to be a lack of concern about our own history, and I'm not sure if it's just a thing, well, history is boring, but it's not. If you think about what your parents went through and, you know, and what they lived through, or your grandparents. I understand some people with families have certain tensions within their family, and yes, I understand there's some bad parents out there, and you can't get close to your parents. And, you know, narcissists and people who like to manipulate you. I get that. You don't want to get out, you don't want to do anything because maybe you've had arguments with them. Now, if you can, you try to make up with them, because this life is so short. This is, I think, the key here. The key is that life is so short that you think you have time. You think like nobody, we never dreamt. Did you dream that someday in your lifetime there was going to be a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic? I mean, maybe you heard about it in the back of your mind. You know, maybe you thought, well, you know, it could happen. You hear it kind of on the news in the background. Oh, every 100 years or so there's one, you know, a disease we're not ready for, or, you know, but you don't think that any minute there's a world war that's going to break out, or a pandemic, or starvation, or famine, or whatever. But these things are happening, and they're happening to people all around the world, even right now. So our experience in the West is that we haven't really prepared mentally for this kind of thing. So what amazes me, and I don't know if it amazes you, is that there's all this video going on, and no one's going to grandma's house. I have seen a couple, like, people doing this as a business, but I mean, come on, we've all got these smartphones or access to something, and no one's going to grandma's house and just setting that sucker up in the corner and letting it run. And I mean, everything from recipes to the history, where do they come from, what was my parents like, you know, how am I like them? Is this because we're in an individualistic society? Something I realize more and more as I get older, when I look in the mirror, as I said, my dad had passed a few years ago. And I'm trying not to make this video too long, but he had passed a few years ago. And one thing I notice is, and I think maybe I didn't see this when I was younger, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, I saw myself as more of an individual, separate from everything, separate from my parents, separate from any influence of my uncles, aunts, whatever. But when I get up in the morning, and it grieves me some, when I look in the mirror, I see my father's face. It seems like as I get older in age, it seems like I can really see him. And it's uncomfortable, because I want my own identity, and I want to be who I am. I want to be an individual, and we all do. But I think we're forgetting that there's this genetic connection we all have. One time years ago, I was sitting, my brother, he lives far away, and he was visiting, and this was decades ago, and we were sitting at a table, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and we were sitting there eating or doing something or talking as he came over to visit us, and I just kind of looked, I mean, it just sort of like I looked down and saw his arm, you know, And it's like, wow, well, those moles and that skin kind of looks just like I'm looking at my arm. And it just, I was probably in my 30s then. And it just struck me like, wait, I'm disconnected to him. It's like, I think that's what we're forgetting. I think that we're forgetting that as family, as relatives, we are really not as individual as we think we are. And we talk so much about, you know, there being an afterlife or something, and there's some way that we go on. And I don't see that. There could be. It's a big universe. There could be some surprise after death. But here's what I know that we know for sure as a fact, that we continue, I say that with, you know, little quotes, we or asterisks, we continue through the people that we are with, through our genetics, through our relationships, and they carry our mannerisms, our gestures, our outlook on the world. And I'm not talking, don't feel bad if you don't have any kids or children, you're saying, oh man, you're saying there's no, but everyone that you're around, you affect them and they affect you. Have you ever noticed back in school that when in your early days when you were in school and you had different teachers, different from one for history and one for geometry or whatever, did you ever notice that when you wrote an essay, like for them, for that teacher, you kind of wrote it in their voice? Like it's like you kind of made it so that, like, subconsciously you were writing it in the way they would teach a class or they were speaking or talking. Anyways, that happened to me. Anyway, I kind of noticed that I would kind of write my essays or tests or projects in a way that seemed that I was reaching my teacher. And it's kind of like giving back to them what they were giving to me. Well, I think it's the same thing with us as humans. We are not as individualistic as we think. I think we need to, before it gets too late, the people that we love, the people that we care about, and if you care about your own history, I mean, this is rich. There's so many things. When you start to think, you start seeing these major events, like maybe not as back as far as the Titanic or the Lusitania sinking, or it just these major events in history, and then it's going to dawn on you when you're 60 or 70, you're going to say, what was the story about the chain? What was the story? What? And it grieves me. Sometimes it grieves me. But I try to take heart. For example, there was this one story, and I hope you just bear with me. You're probably going to lose interest. But my dad grew up on kind of a farm, and people lived in a very rural area, and they weren't well off. They didn't have, you know, the things we have today. And I remember this story he told. Let's see if I can get it right. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Hang in there. They had their families were bigger back then because that's just the way it was. On a farm, you had to have as many kids as you could and to run the farm. And, you know, cattle would get lost. Okay, I don't want to get on too many tangents. But there was this one time that I believe it was milk. You see, I'm losing details here as I get older. But my grandfather would have cows and he would keep milk. And there was a neighbor that would get milk from them. So they would give the milk to them free, but they would expect my grandfather to deliver it to them, which could have been a mile away. So, because people live far distance. So my grandfather, this makes sense because you can see some of his character. You can see some of that sort of bold shyness or whatever. He sent his son to tell the people, and he said to them, I think I remember which one of Dad's brothers it was. They're really young, remember. And he said, okay, take this milk up to the so-and-sos, the neighbors, and tell them this. If it's not worth coming for, it's not worth having. Do I have that backwards? Anyways, the little guy got there to the house, and I guess my dad was with him when they delivered the milk. And what the little guy did is he stood up in all this bravado, and he was going to put them in their place. My grandfather's, one of my uncles, and as a little kid. And he goes, the milk isn't worth having, so don't come get it yourself. So, you know, that's just one of these little stories. And if my dad told it, he would tell it accurately because he was there. I do grieve about those things. I grieve about the fact that we don't appreciate family the same way. I mean, we get together, but it seems like the memories, and at least in our Western culture, and I'm going to say it, our white culture, we don't seem to really, I'm speaking from my point of view because obviously I'm white. There doesn't seem to be some way of making those stories into songs, or not poems, but am I thinking of prose? I'm not sure. But just that they get carried down, they get retold, and we're losing our history of our families. And no, and I'm not talking about any kind of white crap here. I'm just talking about people. I'm talking about people. People are losing our stories. Anyways, if you're watching this and you're young, I'm going to try to keep this short because I'm going to end right now. But if you're younger or capable and you still have parents, uncles, aunts, or whatever, before it's too late, click that little button and get them talking, or set up your camera in the corner if they're not comfortable, and let the thing roll. You can always edit it out later, the stupid stuff. But grandma, dad, even young people, we don't even know if you're going to be around that long. Life is too short, people, and we need to carry our own history before it's too late. You guys got any other stories? Do you identify with this? Do you feel that we're losing our history? Because everybody's off doing something, going to the beach, whatever, and nobody cares about their ancestors. That's the way it seems. Anyways, you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video. Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you about whether you feel the same way. World's full of cameras, and no one's taking pictures. Talk to you later, guys. See you in the next one.